Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bridge. This is your friendly neighborhood game master, Zach Hall, and it's time to keep trucking along with our initial read-through and gut reaction to Star Trek Adventures, the tabletop role-playing game from Modiphius Productions. It's using their in-house 2D20 system, which I love. I think it's really great. We've got a video of me kind of scrolling through the first 4 chapters of the rulebook, commenting on its great art, great layout, great dark mode, which is lovely on the eyes, and just scrolling through the incredible amounts of flavor and technical content, which just adds to the vermicelitude and how deep you can take your adventures using the Star Trek Adventures system. And we're going to pick up in Chapter 5, Reporting for Duty, to actually dive into the character creation process. What do we like? What do we not like? How does it seem to work in what we know about the system? And is there anything from this system that we can take and start using in other games, even if it's just inspiration for homebrew or our own creations back home? So let's dive in and just keep reading through this PDF. As you see, we've got, even as we get into the meat and potatoes of the system, we're already seeing we've got huge amounts of flavor everywhere. We've got a sidebar about infinite diversity, quote from well-known character William T. Riker, now captain, in this era. So we kind of call out eras of play that you can kind of play mid-22nd century, which is the era kind of taking place at the same time as the Enterprise television show. Underrated, I think. Or maybe, and by a smidge, I think. A smidge underrated. Do I think it was very good? No. But I don't think it's as bad as most people thought. It was just very much a visual and style departure from the 3 Star Trek shows that we had in the 90s that we kind of got used to. But now I think, looking back in a post-Kurtzman Star Trek world where we've been exposed to the J.J. Abrams films that added a different style to movies on the big screen, we have seen the multiple TV shows coming out in the Paramount Plus era: Picard, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks. We've broadened our horizons a bit, I think, more to what a Star Trek television show can be and feel like. Now, some people might not like it, and I think those people would rather just see more carbon copies of the shows they saw in the 90s, which, if we're being honest, is kind of what Strange New Worlds is, with, adding in a couple dashes of more modern television storytelling. But come on. This is, play what you like, and I think Enterprise is underrated. That might be something I have to go back and revisit now in my 30s, where I don't think I appreciated it at the time. It might be worth rechecking out. We then have the original series TV show from the 60s and the mid-23rd century. Then we have a new next gen century, which is another 100 years in the future, the mid-24th century. I think it's basically right around the time that Voyager has been lost into the Delta Quadrant. So it's assumed that it's basically running in the time period that all 3 of the 90s Star Trek shows were on air at the same time. Or at least we were still getting films from Next Gen while Deep Space Nine and Voyager were on air. But that does not mean that we can't play in other eras. If you want to move forward to a post-Voyager, post-Deep Space Nine era, that's not terribly difficult to do. Really, that's just a narrative thing. The stat blocks don't have to change much at all. And I do know the community of homebrewing around Star Trek Adventures is very much alive and well. So if you'd like to play in a different era of play, Google Star Trek Adventures Continuing Missions. I believe that's the kind of community website that holds a lot of stuff. And Modifius has created a lot of PDF only material. Like I think just in the past couple weeks, past month or so, they released a Lower Decks supplement. If you wanted to play a campaign using Star Trek Adventures more closely like the adult animated show Lower Decks. I always forget about Prodigy. That is a Star Trek show. Never watched it. My kid is just too young to find that interesting, but the intended audience for the show is also too young for me to actually like try and watch. Lower Decks is very funny though. All right. So basically talking about different types of characters. We have player characters. We have main characters. But we also have supporting characters. Now, if you've ever watched Star Trek for any length of time, you could easily see how players having a secondary character or a supporting character might be really helpful depending on the mission. Like, in an actual play I haven't seen players have multiple characters, but that meant the captain was going on a lot of away missions, which they normally wouldn't, or it would be against regulations and somebody would say something. But a player was playing the captain of the ship, and you don't want a player just sitting there all day, an entire game or multiple game sessions, because the captain stayed on the ship while the rest of the party went somewhere else. So absolutely something to think about as a team of GM and players, of deciding, who's going to fit what role. Are we willing to introduce into the narrative reasons why a certain character is coming along for everything or isn't coming along for everything? And what do we do in those situations? How do we make sure everybody is involved? And you have multiple options. You can introduce narrative reasons to do so, or you can just have a couple players play multiple characters whenever the session kind of calls for it, or whenever the story arc and episode calls for a certain character getting more limelight and being in a different place than everybody else. So something to think about. I definitely think that, listen, Session Zero is important every game, incredibly important for Star Trek Adventures, so that everybody can level set, expectations can be clear from the get-go, and just enjoy. Everybody can go into it knowing what the goal is, and so that everybody can enjoy. And I definitely think character creation needs to be a group process, because Star Trek, Starfleet, and especially if you're playing like a Klingon campaign or a Romulan campaign, Starfleet is probably the least militaristic, with like a clear infrastructure and hierarchy of responsibility and authority than the least out of the three, but it's the default. And if people think they're coming in with maybe other role-playing game backgrounds, where you're kind of used to a party usually having like pretty flat leadership, like there's usually not necessarily a leader. You might have a face, but not necessarily a leader who gets to tell everybody what to do. That is technically how it works on a starship. So you gotta have to have those maybe potentially awkward conversations. Like, okay, do we want to avoid that where the captain is an NPC and the GM gets to be the captain and gets to tell, basically the captain is a kind of a GM insert getting the lore dump and kind of boss us around, and that way we don't have to make this awkward? Or somebody really looking forward to playing captain and looking forward to being able to like make those hard decisions that end up falling on a captain? And is everybody okay with occasionally having to do what that player wants to do? Of course, you could always narratively, okay, this ship is, this captain runs things differently. Like, he's going to take a poll and check in with his officers before making a decision. But that might not be what some people's idea of Star Trek is. Like, you're kind of breaking a little bit of the assumed norm for how the fiction of the game is going to run. So just check in, and everybody needs to be on the same page. So we talk about traits. Traits are usually will be things that kind of happen with options. So like your race will be a trait. You then have to create your values. There are statements that describe the attributes, beliefs, and convictions of your character. So they're not simple opinions. They're usually but they're fundamental to your character. This is a great, I think, creating values for your characters, even in a system that doesn't codify or turn that into a mechanic, is a great thing. It gives you a really good baseline for who is this character? How do they behave? What do they do? What's important to them? That's the kind of stuff you should probably know about your character if you're doing even kind of basic minimum levels of roleplay. So I love that Star Trek Adventures codifies it. It does have a mechanic you can lean into and change those values as you go. And you have opportunities to get benefits or consequences based on acting within your values. We then have attributes, which is, kind of stuff we would be used to seeing in a more standard, like a role-playing game coming from the D&D Pathfinder world. So have control, precision, accuracy, and careful timing, daring, reacting to new situations without doubt, hesitation, or caution, so more emotional, mental, fitness, enduring hardship, and employing force, covers physical conditioning, general health and well-being, fortitude, and endurance. Insight, understanding people and their feelings, and being open to different ideas and ways of thinking. Self-awareness, being conscious of a creature's current state of mind, etc. Presence is power, personality, and the ability to command attention and respect. Really love this presence attribute, and it actually helped me expand my idea of what charisma represents in more classic D20 settings. I actually just used basically this definition of presence as the definition for charisma when onboarding in a new player to my Pathfinder 2e game. He's not necessarily new to the hobby. He's experienced and watched actual plays, listens to actual plays of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but he's rolling up a champion who has charisma as their spellcasting ability. But he didn't necessarily want to be a extroverted face, taking attention person. So I was able to basically use Star Trek Adventures' description of presence as a definition for charisma. I feel like they're pretty interchangeable. Even if that isn't explicitly how Pathfinder and the core rulebook would define the charisma ability, I think it's true enough to where if you have a player who's uncomfortable necessarily with what their default imagination or idea of what charisma is, I find this definition for presence kind of opens up their mind to what charisma can be like, even if that isn't explicitly what another system might define it as, which is why I think it's important that as well-rounded GMs who are interested in the hobby and enjoy the hobby, we read other core rulebooks outside of our normal game that we run. I think it's very normal for GMs to have a favorite, to have a game that they run almost all the time, or they stick to one game at kind of their highest level of expertise. But it's why I enjoy reading core rule books for other systems that I know I will probably never get a chance to run. Star Trek Adventures is absolutely one of them. Would I love to roll up and play in a Star Trek Adventures game? 100% I would. But I don't think I'll ever really have that opportunity. I know my life. I know the people around me and what might be available, but I can add things that I see in Star Trek Adventures to my games, even without having to homebrew something, which is why I think this is important. We then have reason, logic, and meticulous analysis. Forming hypothesis and intricate planning fits extremely well for this setting. We then have disciplines, which is basically another set of 6 attributes, for lack of a better word, that you are trained in. I think we kind of spoke on it at the very end of the last video, but you have attributes, which is a culmination of both your biology and your physical state, you as a person, as a meat sack. And then you have disciplines, which are how trained are you in these 6 different disciplines that kind of cover wide areas of use on a starship, like on a Starfleet starship. And so when we end up making checks, remember in Star Trek Adventures, you do the math of like adding your attribute and your discipline scores together. And then your goal is to roll on a D20 lower than that score together. So the higher score, the higher chance you have of rolling under it and succeeding in what you're trying to do. So you have command, which covers a wide range of interpersonal interactions, especially leadership, negotiating, and both coordinating and motivating others. So like, a captain or a commander, we kind of want to like maximize and make command their highest trained discipline. The con covers piloting craft of all sizes, from ground vehicles and shuttles to grand starships. Also includes navigation, both on the ground and in space, understanding of starship operations, like procedures, cultures of space travel, exploration, etc. Engineering, inventing, understanding, designing, repairing, maintaining tech. Pretty understandable. Security, use of force during combat, making attacks, essentially, as well as observing and analyzing threatening situations and watching for potential perils. So if you're wanting to play a security officer, like a tactical officer, you're going to want to maximize security. And if you think you're ever going to get in any kind of like melee or physical combat, you're probably going to want to make sure that you have a pretty high fitness as well, right? Science, pretty self-explanatory, I think. And then medicine, also pretty self-explanatory. We then have focuses. So while disciplines are broad training categories, focuses are extremely specific. So examples being anthropology, botany, plasma power systems, cybernetics, emergency medicine, espionage, genetics, hand phasers, hand-to-hand combat, psychiatry, interrogation, warp field dynamics. This is kind of like the lore section of Pathfinder 2e, where there's like a suggested list, but there's always this opportunity of it being open-ended. And if you can come up with something that isn't necessarily covered in the rulebook, but it makes sense for the campaign you're running, just invent your own talent or your own focus. Then talents are additional benefits that a character possesses that define areas of speciality, advantages of their personal approach to circumstances, and other decisive ideas. These normally take the form of a bonus, extra d20s, rerolls, bonus momentum, ability to use a different discipline in a situation, and so forth. Many talents have one or more specific requirements. These are conditions that must be fulfilled before the talent can be selected, such as belonging to a specific species or having a discipline at a specific rating or above. Large selection of talents is provided in its own section, starting on page 135, which is in about 35 pages. So then we have the life path creation system, which I think is extremely cool. This is the default for creating a character in Star Trek Adventures. I believe there's a more straightforward, faster, alternate way if you'd like to do that. But I think life path is extremely cool. And I have seen this type, not saying people would getting inspired directly from this, but I've seen this kind of character creation and backstory generation and a ton of supplements that you can find on places like DriveThruRPG, Pathfinder Infinite, etc. for any kind of system. So I think this kind of character creation is extremely cool and could be easily ported over to a more high fantasy type setting and game system like Pathfinder. It's a series of steps that represent important events of the character's life, and the way those events shape the character's nature is reflected in the mechanical choices each step presents. Consists of 7 steps, with each step allowing for a new choice from a list of options. Each character is made up of the compound parts described above. These will be decided upon each step of the life path. These are cumulative gains, and as a player works through each step of the life path, the results are added to their character being created. In this way, the character takes shape stage by stage. While this option presents the step as a series of tables with results that can be generated by dice rolls, players may choose to ignore any and all of the results rolled, or even to not bother rolling in the first place. In this way, the system never stands in the way of a desired character concept. So yeah, so like as we kind of scroll through, you can see that the tables are kind of there. So like if you can absolutely use life path as like basically a random character generator. But I think most characters, I think most players would want control over this type of thing, right? Like they're going to want to have a say in it. You just pick from the choices. So you choose a species. All characters begin with a score of 7 for each attribute and 1 for each discipline. These will be increased as you make choices going through the life path. A finished character cannot have more than 12 in any attribute, can only have 1 attribute at 12, cannot have more than 5 in any discipline, and can only have 1 discipline with a score of 5. During character creation steps, a character may end up with scores above these limits, but this will be fixed at step 7. I don't love that the math basically, like, they admit that, like, hey, this, you know, if you pick optimal choices, like if you kind of have an end goal, you think of like those personality quizzes, like, you know, what house am I going to be sorted in? But you kind of know what you're shooting for. It's kind of easy to see which ones would result in like the most optimum choice and result for what you're trying to get. It kind of stinks that life path isn't so optimized that even if you took the optimal path, that would give you the max without necessarily having to go back and like kind of fix and readjust scores. But at the same time, as I say that out loud, I think what that means is that Star Trek is full of exceptional characters. And so, yes, like from a mechanics and balance standpoint, we don't want anybody above these maxes, and with too many of these at the max, we're not going to punish you by just making you not good at other things at the same time. Let you pick what you want. You know that like you max this out, you are among the best at what you do, and based on the choices you make, you're going to be able to also be really good at something else too, which is great. It would have been so easy to go in a highly specialized area in character creation, but what you end up with, and I think this is represented by like the fiction the game is based on too, you end up with characters who are exceptional at a specific thing and then well above average in several other things, and maybe have one area that is like an obvious weakness the story, the writers, the GM uses as ways to ramp up tension, create opportunities for character growth. So really, really cool. So when you choose a species, it provides a few benefits. Each species lists 3 attributes. You add +1 to each attribute. You get a trait, which is, the trait is just the equals to your character species, but that can reflect and unlock certain things like talents that maybe require a trait to get access to. And then you get, this character gains a single talent. The talent can be chosen freely from any that are available to the character. Further, each species has a small number of talents available to characters of that species, reflecting their physiology or culture in some way. So here on this random species table, they actually weight it completely differently based on what area you're playing in, where like very popular and well-known races to the next-gen era, like Bajoran and Betazoids, didn't exist in those. Or Trill, popular and existed with the original series, but had yet been encountered in the Enterprise era. But and these are very basic, and they have released a ton of these in additional supplements that you can find. DriveThruRPG, Modiphius' website and their digital store. So I mean, there's only 8 options here covering, you know, probably the absolutely most popular, even though like Denobulin is maybe not the most popular, and Dorian, the perk of being available in all 3 eras. But there's literally dozens and dozens of known species in the Star Trek universe. There is either an official supplement or a third-party or fan-created supplement that gets you the ancestry and traits that you would want. So we can see Andorian, Bajoran, the attributes. They also provide an example value, which I think is really, really cool. In case like you're having trouble coming up with those traits, it is sometimes really hard to come up with things when just looking at a blank piece of paper. So giving you even if at every step of the way you just took the example value, you at least have values, and you can help create the idea of who this character is by the time that you finish the life path, which is awesome. Betazoid, Denobulin, human. Humans doing what all humans in role-playing systems apparently do, which is instead of predetermining options for a boost you get to pick as the player. And I mean, this is, true for Star Trek. Humans are adaptable and resilient compared to other races, or species, I should say. Tellarite, Trill, Vulcan. So with the Trill calling out that you can be a former initiate who wasn't joined, or you can be a joined Trill, though it does require Game Master's permission to take this talent. Or it says it requires Game Master permission to take this talent after character creation. I would still be nice to your Game Master and check in with them if you want to play a joined Trill. If you're unfamiliar with the Star Trek universe, joined Trill are exactly like I'm drawing a blank on the name of the species from Stargate that also has symbiotes. But basically, it's a race of people that has a symbiotic relationship with a creature who can live inside and basically like implant itself like along your brain stem, and they share memories they have distinct personalities and distinct memories, and joined Trill basically lives inside of that symbiote. And so when you become joined with this symbiote, you get access to all of the memories of the former joined Trill, their personalities, and there's a lot of Star Trek fiction devoted to joined Trill characters, how their attitude and disposition and life changes after becoming joined and being exposed to these other characters. And being a joined Trill in game basically means that you always have an excuse for knowing a piece of information that you might not have known normally. Kind of like bardic lore in Pathfinder and other like fantasy type games, where you've just been exposed to way more than the normal person has been, right? But extremely cool. And then Vulcans, you get stuff like access to the Kolinahr. You can mind meld or nerf pinch. Then basically you get a whole section on how to create your own if you want to, and working with your GM, obviously. So step 2, environment. Did you grow up on your homeworld, on a busy colony, on an isolated colony, frontier colony, starship or starbase, or another species world? And based on that choice, you get access to a new value, increases in an attribute, depending, and then a discipline that you can increase, depending. So it really, really cool. I really love this, and this is the type of thing that this is kind of one of those first questions that I've started asking my players in my Pathfinder game when doing character creation. Like, where did you grow up? Like, did you grow up in a community that was largely your own ancestry? Did you grow up like what percentage of your community was the people that look like you and talk like you, sound like you? Really cool that they call out some example values. So like if you grew up on a starship or starbase, a starship is a home, it's crew, a family. Like, really awesome. So in our example, the next step for Nathan's character is environment. Nathan again rolls for it to see if it produces any interesting results. He rolls a 3, isolated colony, and sees some interesting possibilities there, which is really cool. The value that he decided to take is understanding is the purpose of life. Very Star Trek of him. We then have upbringing. Did you grow up in Starfleet, in business or trade, agricultural or rural, science and technology, artistic and creative, or diplomacy and politics? You can kind of see where that leads as far as like probably boosting a very specific discipline. It also gives you access to a focus. So for instance, in the agriculture or rural choice, your characters living off the land and growing up on the edge of civilization allows them to increase one of con, security, or medicine. Then their focus should relate to their character's rural lifestyle, and the schools they learn there. Examples include animal handling, athletics, emergency medicine, endurance, etc. I'm continually, the more I look at the book, the more I'm continually blown away by the sidebars and quick little inserts of in-universe fiction that adds so much flavor, like this ethical family unit little 2-paragraph bit, apparently from a term paper for a cadet at Starfleet Academy in the late 22nd century. Really cool. So then we have Starfleet Academy, and which track you took: command track, operations track, or a science track. Obviously this is big, gonna have a lot of impact. You get 3 points for your attributes, which can be split between 2 or 3. You're increasing discipline by a lot. You're getting 3 focuses and another talent. Here's some example values, like inexperienced and idealistic, or always prepared, always vigilant, precise to a fault. All good values. I love the values that are both like calling out something true about yourself while also kind of being a negative. I'm precise to a fault. That can be used extremely positively in a situation where I need to be precise. But if the GM wants to tag into that value and create some narrative friction by increasing a complication zone or, anything along those lines, making you be precise to a fault in a situation where that isn't necessarily required, but maybe adds a complication to the situation, extremely cool. If I was a GM, I would hope the characters built in the party at least each character would have 1, if not 2, out of the 5 or 6 values that you end up having. You then have a career, and you basically get to pick between 3. Do you want to be a young officer, where you're defined more by your potential than your skill? You get a value that kind of fits with that, and then you get a talent called untapped potential, which only young officers can get. You can only get it during character creation. It actually limits, it gives you a new max ceiling to your attribute. So instead of being 12, you can't have any attribute above 11 or any discipline above 4 instead of 5. But whenever this character succeeds at a task for which they bought 1 or more dice with either momentum or threat, they can roll a dice. And if the character receives bonus momentum equal to the roll on the effect dice, and adds 1 point to threat if an effect is rolled. So it gives you this kind of pretty crazy, not overpowered because you're taking a pretty big nerf to your character, but it does give you access to a quick but balanced way of generating a ton of momentum, which can obviously be extremely useful in specific conditions, which I think is really cool and narratively fits what's going on being a young officer with untapped potential. I think this is one of those areas where the mechanic really fits the fiction that they're trying to replicate. You then have an experienced officer, where you just basically get a free talent. This is basically the default down the middle. You then have a veteran officer that has decades of experience in Starfleet. You get a value, and then you get a talent called veteran described below. So this is again a feat you can only get during character creation or at game master's discretion. So if you play long enough or have enough time skips where a character maybe moves from experienced officer to veteran officer, maybe they get this veteran talent when that happens. So character is wise and experienced and draws upon inner reserves of willpower and determination. Whenever the character spends a point of determination, roll for an effect. If an effect is rolled, immediately regain that spent point of determination. The character has a rank of at least lieutenant commander. So lieutenant commander is the lowest rank a veteran officer can have. We then have career events, which is really, really cool and has several, this is a 20 option choice. It's okay, what has happened in your career that shaped you? This is basically picking a trauma. I think pretty much, yeah, all of these can be traumatic in some way. Some of them are not. They are explicitly a good thing that doesn't have an accompanying trauma, 3 lauded by another culture. Maybe negotiating a treaty could be traumatic depending on what happened it took. But 9 mentored, not traumatic. Even though I guess you could turn that into traumatic if you wanted to. Breakthrough or invention, So like, but a lot of these are, okay, is there something bad that has happened to you prior to the game actually starting that helped shape you into the officer and person that you are? And then step 7, finishing touches. This is when you get one final value. This is when you can kind of reshuffle any attribute and discipline scores. If you've got attributes or disciplines that are above your character's allowed max, you basically move them from one place to another. And then final check. Total is going to equal up to 56. Disciplines should total up to 16. You should have 4 values by the end, 4 talents, and 6 focuses. You then get stress, which is kind of like narrative hit points, but like we accept that like you're not actually going to take physical damage every time, but stress can be anything. It can be emotional stress, it can be mental stress, it can be the physical stress of, you know, being hit and, you know, being injured. What damage bonus they have, which is equal to your security discipline. Personal details like character's name and age, what department they're in, their rank and role. There should be a section here later in just a bit for like a breakdown of rank and role. Let's see if we can find that. Got some names, personality, appearance. Here we go, rank and role. So you have commanding officers, command department only, the captain. Every ship must have a commanding officer. So basically what they're saying is the commanding officer is usually someone with the rank captain in an instance where you're on a vessel or with a team or group where the commanding officer is not a captain rank. Like if you were on a starbase, or maybe you were playing a like section 13 game, you know, like doing like some Black Ops stuff where you're maybe not like a normal starship crew, but you have a commanding officer. You're going to call them captain, even if they aren't the rank of captain. You then have the XO, executive officer, second in command. On a starship, we're used to kind of seeing these being commander or lieutenant commander ranks, referred to as commander or XO. Operations manager, engineering department, manages and oversees all technical operations, normally from the ops station on the bridge. They don't have a recommended rank for that one. They have chief engineer, chief of security, CMO, science officer, flight controller, ship's counselor, comm officer. Then to determine their ranks, character can be of any rank, though there are a few restrictions in specific circumstances. The choice made in step 5, career, may limit what ranks the character can choose from. I think if you picked a young officer, you could only be an ensign. Was that true? Did I make that up? Untapped potential. This character cannot gain any higher rank than lieutenant junior grade while they possess this trait, or possess this talent. So once you would like normally get promoted above lieutenant junior grade, which is directly above ensign, you would no longer be young. So you have ensign at the bottom, lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant commander, commander, captain. But then you have enlisted personnel. Not everyone in Starfleet is an officer. Considerable number of enlisted personnel who go through different training and have been trained for specific roles and duties instead, outranked by even the least experienced ensign. These personnel are nevertheless vital. Some are even given authority over those who technically outrank them, teaching junior officers the practical skills they'll need to advance, while others can earn a full commission and become officers themselves. A player may choose to make their character enlisted instead of an officer, following the normal procedure with a few minor changes. They don't attend Starfleet Academy, but instead receive their training elsewhere. This has no effect on the rules and is purely background. And they cannot select command as their major during that stage. Further, any enlisted character cannot take the commanding officer or executive officer roles. Enlisted personnel have their ranks listed below, starting at crewman, 1st through 3rd class, petty officers or specialist or yeoman, 1st through 3rd class, chief petty officer, chief specialist, senior chief petty officer, chief specialist, or master chief petty officer, chief specialist. I believe Starfleet, I'm not a military guy. I was never super interested in the military history, even though I was homeschooled, and I am neurodivergent. So this is very up my alley. So I am counterculture here, but I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, Star Trek their ranking and their hierarchy of responsibility and authority. I believe it's based on the U.S. Navy for the most part. I'm sure there might be some inconsistencies. This is a post-income, post-money society, so like it matters a little less. But I think I would have no problem playing enlisted personnel. It doesn't. A chief engineer, yeah, those are officers. But I mean, one of my favorite characters of all time in Star Trek, Miles O'Brien, he's enlisted. Chief petty officer, I believe. Both in, well, he's probably a lower rank in Next Gen before he moved, but now I feel like I'm talking out my ass, and I'm actually going to have to look him up so I don't get hounded in the comments. Yeah, senior chief petty officer. So he was enlisted. I was like 98% sure, but then I got antsy about it. So he was initially, he was eventually promoted to chief of ops on Deep Space Nine, which I think they listed as a command. Did I see that? Operations manager, but not crazy that could go to an enlisted person, and there's no like no minimum rank there. Cool. So then here's a sample character sheet. We have a joined Trill named Joal, lieutenant commander in the science department. Grew up an isolated colony amongst rural agricultural families. High reason, high presence and control, low daring. And then obviously a science officer who's cross-trained in medicine and command. Definitely looks like he's like science officer, kind of trained to make sure everybody's okay. Trained in some phasers, code of justice, fun, survival training, linguistics and psychology. Got the joined trait. Then have like the a lower or basically like non-life path method. If you just, choose a role, assign attributes, pick a species, assign disciplines, blah, 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 like bang, 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 go, go, go. Then have support. We talk about supporting characters. These are less detailed and are created in a less involved manner than main characters, and they are not permanently owned by a single player. Instead, supporting characters are created as and when circumstance require within the game. They represent the rest of the ship's crew in play, giving the player subordinates to command and provide the experience of being a senior Starfleet officer in play. They allow players to take on different roles in play, allowing them to capitalize on a skill set that doesn't exist among the main characters, or to play a more active role in an adventure that doesn't focus on their main character, or account for players who are absent. And they allow the players to split their characters between different activities in different locations without being left out of the game for long stretches. Players can use supporting characters in situations where their main characters aren't present, which we kind of talked about earlier in this video. And they allow smaller groups of players to bolster their numbers during challenges, such as by ensuring that enough bridge stations are manned during a space battle. I will add a fifth option is officially creating supporting characters, especially for the rest of your bridge officers, means you can potentially take less work off of the GM, and you can, in these high stress situations where the GM might be in control of a lot of other things, handing off the supporting characters for the other bridge characters to the players to be responsible for rolling and making decisions for them, so that the GM isn't taking up like 50% of the turns in a situation, and like just keeping the players involved. And it's definitely something different for Star Trek. I think some players come in with this expectation that they're going to play one character in this world and everybody else is going to be either another player or controlled by the GM. But the Star Trek world, especially a starship or a starbase, is so big, like that might not make sense in every way. So I hope players come in with a bit of a more open mind towards using and utilizing supporting characters, and just being open to that, especially if you're playing a really high up officer, that like it might not make sense for your person to be in a specific situation, especially the captain. So we got using the supporting character and how to create one. I'll skip past those. And then we have the huge talent list, which we've kind of gotten a taste for what they are, and we kind of know what they do. They're usually ways of giving yourself an extra dice in a certain situation, giving you a reroll in a certain situation, or giving you an opportunity to use a different discipline than normal in very specific situations that kind of fall into what you are good at. So then let's jump into character development. So obviously, you can level up in Star Trek Adventures. Your character and your starship, or like whatever, kind of thing you are on, can grow, can change, can get better. But this happens in a more abstract way in Star Trek by using milestones. This represents the main character working to improve the crew and the ship. So you have normal milestones when a character challenged a value or directive, they were injured by an attack to kill, or when the character used at least one value or directive possibly, or at least one positively, or one value or directive negatively. So these kind of milestones allow characters to change and adapt to the ongoing game, rather than improving the character's abilities. So you can like shuffle an attribute score around, replace an old value for a new value if it no longer makes sense. You can replace a focus, etc. All kind of things that I think would be kind of expected that could happen in a different style of game. You don't like that skill anymore, you don't think it makes sense for the character you were trying to build, and you just didn't realize, let's swap it out. Star Trek Adventures, a normal character advancement is not you getting better at something. You're usually a pretty finished, well-realized person by the time that you're on a starship and operating in these kind of situations that the game would try to fictionalize. But then you have arc milestones, which represents the culmination of a story that drives a single character's growth and development, a story arc. This represents a major change for the character, and arc milestones have the biggest impacts of all three types of milestones. When a main character has received 2 or more spotlight milestones, the next spotlight milestone they receive will be an arc milestone instead. The number of spotlight milestones required increases with every arc milestone. So when you receive an arc milestone, it grants all of the benefits of the spotlight milestone and allows the character to select an option from the following list. So you can choose a single attribute and increase it by 1. You still can't go above 12. Choose a single discipline and increase it by 1. It still can't go above 5. Get a new talent, a new focus, and a new value. Or you can make those same kind of things and apply the above to a supporting character of yourself. You can also use this to increase your ships, increase a ship system, a discipline, or add additional talents to a ship. We haven't talked about ships yet, but ships have character sheets just like players do, and they look remarkably similar. Or basically function the same way as a player character, just with some different names for different, no attributes, but systems, but kind of feels and plays out the same way. There is then a subsystem controlling a reputation, which can impact, are you being successful at your job on the ship? Is it time to move you up? Do we need to move you down? Etc., etc. Pretty cool. Again, still love this art. Really cool. That's chapter 5. Basically how to build a character. Again, I really think this system is really cool. The life path system for Star Trek Adventures is great. I think it takes the kind of step-by-step mechanical, okay, you picked this, add this to a base that I'm familiar with from Pathfinder 2nd edition. And then adds on top of that by kind of growing and expanding on something that a background would be, by kind of breaking that into different parts of what kind of community did you live in? What type of community was that? What kind of areas did it focus on? And then being able to mechanically decide or randomly roll for something happening to you already in life, like this major event, traumatic or non-traumatic, I think it's really, really cool. And I think it just speaks to, you know, by the time you get done, you really have, I think you do have a really full fleshed out idea for a character, even if you came in with absolutely zero idea of the type of character that you were going to make, except for maybe like the end role that you wanted to have. But there was enough freedom to where like you make really kind of, in the choices you make, you're probably going to get a pretty high score in whatever you'd like. I really like, I think the character creation really lends itself to the overall game, to the fiction, to the system at play. I think it's great. And if you think it's great, let me know what your favorite part is in the comments of this video. If there's another part of Star Trek Adventures that you really like that we haven't talked about yet, let me know. Once we get down into the nitty gritty of a system where it's less of a fluid idea, I think these videos kind of drop off. But I think we've got at least one more video in us of looking through the Star Trek Adventures rulebook. And if there's enough interest, we'll keep figuring out ways to make more. I know Star Trek Adventures is not like an incredibly popular role-playing game, but hopefully from the events of the past 3 to 4 months, I hope more and more players and game masters are exploring other options besides just the big one in D&D, you know? So if you like this type of video, are interested in learning about more systems, hearing some random thoughts from a GM who's just like you, a guy without a ton of time, but really enjoys the hobby and wants to make his games as good as he can make it, subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of these gut reaction first looks, and, you know, this is just me talking to a microphone, no script, unedited except to get rid of silences. So thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day. Catch you on the next time. Peace.